Progress.
Well, hello and welcome back to our study of the book of Nehemiah. We are looking at a unit entitled Kingdom Assignment with the subtitle The Relentless Pursuit of Obedience. And what we're doing is looking at Nehemiah as he follows God's plan and purpose for him to rebuild the walls around Jerusalem. We've seen a number of things take place. We've seen his faithfulness in prayer and seeking God's wisdom and direction, his protection, his prayer of favor before King Nebuchadnezzar, as well as the provisions that are made by King Nebuchadnezzar of military help, financial help, and actually building resources. Along the way, he's also encountered opposition. We're going to see three old friends, so to speak, in this lesson: Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem. They were previously mentioned as opponents of Nehemiah in his attempt to rebuild the walls. They come back, and this time you'd think, though Nehemiah has been successful at almost finishing the walls, that they would just give up. But what we're going to find is that they don't. They are going to put out some final attempts to stop Nehemiah from completing the task. They're going to use different types of deception to try and get Nehemiah off course and to lead him away, and honestly, to probably take him out. And so, what we're going to look at here is chapter 6, verses 10 to 14. The focus is going to be on that last attempt against Nehemiah and how he thwarts that. But it's the third attempt of three. And I think what we need to do is go ahead and look at the background passage as well. So we'll begin our study with Nehemiah chapter 6 and go from verse 1 through verse 14. I'll show you the outline on the screen in a moment of the three different attempts to meet with Nehemiah, of course, with nefarious purposes. I just want us to remind ourselves that whenever we are seeking to do God's will, there will be opposition. Sometimes it's the internal voice opposing us, where we doubt our abilities to do what God wants us to do. It could be friends and neighbors, even brothers and sisters in Christ that kind of cast doubts. Sometimes, of course, there's even greater risk and greater opponents, and that is the people outside the kingdom of God. And we can't leave out the devil. Satan is going to press and attack and try to thwart our plans. What we can do here with Nehemiah is look at some principles that he follows. We've looked at some principles of leadership that he has employed along the way. We can summarize those as we get further down the road in these lessons. Today, the focus is on being wise and being aware and then acting rightly, not to be fooled by the opponent's schemes, if you will. We're going to see three different attempts, as we said, and we're going to see Nehemiah's three responses. And in the end, we're going to see how he is successful in not falling for the attempts against him in these foolish, deceptive ways. Let me go ahead and show you the outline real quickly. We said we're going to have 3 points. They're going to be three different times back to back to back when these individuals will come after Nehemiah. The first is going to be a first attempt to meet with him. So what we're going to see in verses 1 through 4 is that first invitation to meet. And of course, we'll see what transpires in that regard. Then there's a second invitation. What we'll see in verses 5 through 9 is it will be accompanied by rumors against him. And therefore, what they're trying to do is, if you want to say it this way, blackmail him into coming in to meet. And then the third attempt will be to meet in the temple. And what we're going to find is that also is deceptive in the sense that it's going to try and uh, make Nehemiah seek asylum, if you will, against something that he knows is not going to happen. But what we're going to find is, in each case, Nehemiah is wise to the task, and he's going to be able to see what's happening here. I'm going to read each section separately and talk about them. What we are seeing, though, is Nehemiah using godly wisdom and awareness to know when he is being deceived, when there is an attempt to deceive him. What we'll look at the very end in time of application is to note that Jesus has some principles in mind too. And so if you want to go ahead and bookmark Matthew chapter 7, verses 15 to 23, we'll read those at the end as well. As we get started, though, let me go ahead and read the text to you. The first attempt or first invitation to meet is going to come in chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. Let me read that to you, and then we'll talk about it. There are some pretty straightforward things from a historical standpoint and from just the practice of what Nehemiah has done in this situation. So we read chapter 6, verses 1 to 4. Now, when it was reported to Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies that I had rebuilt the wall, and that no breach was left in it, although I had at that time I had not installed the doors in the gates, Sanballat and Geshem sent a message to me saying, "Come, let's meet together at Shepharim in the plain of Ono." But they were plotting to harm me. So I sent messengers to them saying, "I am doing a great work and am unable to come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you?" Then they sent messengers to me 4 times, worded in this way, and I answered them with the same wording. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at what's going on here. Of course, what we're hearing is that the wall is done, though not completely done. There are some doors that still need to be hung, so to speak. Word gets back to Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem, and the rest. Of course, we have just the three. The rest would be many of those that were mentioned in the previous passages that came against Nehemiah. And you can think of all the people from the different groups, north, south, east, and west, that would basically encamp against them. And that led to Nehemiah setting up a plan where people would work on the wall while also people were guarding the wall with rotations in the shifts and so forth. The wall's done except some doors. Well, what happens then, of course, as you read in verse 2, Sanballat and Geshem's only mentioned a few times in the book of Nehemiah. He's making a reappearance here. They're calling him out to say, let's have a meeting at Shepharim in the plain of Ono. Ono, about 20 miles north of Jerusalem. What's going on here? Nehemiah very clearly understands at the end of verse 2 that there was a plot to harm him. He's been aware of this. He knows that there's been opposition. They've been up to no good. It's not like they're going to now meet with him as some kind of peace treaty. All along, they've tried to tell the people around that all Nehemiah is doing is raising up this wall so that there can be a rebellion against Babylon. And that's going to come up again here. What Nehemiah recognizes is these people are doing they're stopping at nothing to keep him from finishing. They just have it out for him. There are ethnic things going on here. There are religious things going on here. They see that this wall will probably keep them out too. We know that there's a mixture of Jews and Gentiles and Samaritans by now that will all mix together and live in the same land. Nehemiah is just building the walls around Jerusalem to protect it. We'll see later, again, the reprisal of a plot scheme that is conjured up in the minds of these individuals that they're going to try and tell Nebuchadnezzar that Nehemiah is doing nothing but setting up for rebellion. Notice Nehemiah's words at the end of verse 2. They were plotting to harm me. He's aware of their situation. He's aware of who they are. Nothing seems to have changed. They've tried to oppose him before. He doesn't believe them for a minute that there's any change of heart, that they just want to meet. So what Nehemiah does in verse 3, he says, I sent messengers to them. And notice what he says. Basically, he says, I got work to do. I don't have time to meet. If I leave, the work's not going to get done. We don't have time to meet. So he's not really coming up with anything unique here. He's not really lying. He's still got work to do. He is the supervisor. While there's not a lot of work to do, he says it's a great work. He says, I am doing a great work. It's an important work. This is taking up my time. This is more important than any meeting that I'm going to have with you. Of course, what he's doing is, quote, playing the game. He knows that their meeting is not going to yield anything positive for him. It's a detriment to him. And so he says he can't meet. He's not lying. He's working. He's busy. He's got an assignment. He's doing God's will. And there's no time to stop doing that for the sake of this meeting, especially when he knows that it means nothing good for him. He says, why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you? What happened is they didn't stop at that. They were persistent. It wasn't once that they came to him and said, let's meet together. They came after him 4 different times. Verse 4 says, they sent messages to me 4 times, worded the same way. Let's meet. Let's meet. Let's meet. Let's meet at Shepharim at the plains of Ono. And what's interesting, Nehemiah says, I answered them with the same wording. It's persistence on their part and persistence and perseverance on his part. He didn't need to change the story. He didn't need to come up with a different excuse. He probably could have. He could have come up with different reasons. There could be a number of reasons that he could have given, but his focus, his number one focus was doing what God had called him to do. So he stands firm on that. He knows that there's nothing good going to come from any meeting that they have. And so he says, no, I'm busy and it won't do any good for me to stop and leave the work behind. I have work to do. It's a great work. It's an important work. Well, that's not enough because then when you get to chapter 6, verses 5 through 9, there's a second invitation to meet. And I want to read that to you. And notice what happens here. There is a new stepping up of the challenge, but it's in many ways a revision or a return to a previous type of threat. Verses 5 through 9, it says, Then Sanballat sent his servant to me in the same way a fifth time with an open letter in his hand. In it was written, it is reported among the nations, and Geshmu says that you and the Jews intend to rebel. For that reason, you are rebuilding the wall, and you are to be their king according to these reports. You have also appointed prophets to proclaim in Jerusalem concerning you. A king is in Judah, and now it will be reported to the king, Babylon, according to these reports. So come now, let's consult together. Nehemiah responds in verse 8, Then I sent a message to him saying, Nothing like these things have you that you are saying has been done, but you are inventing them in your own mind. And he concludes, For all of them were trying to frighten us, thinking, They will become discouraged with the work, and it will not be done. But now, God, strengthen my hands. Now, the word God there in the NASB 2020 is in italics, indicating that it's implied he's talking to God there. You know, along the way, that what Nehemiah will do is narrate for us what took place, and then he would step off and have a word of prayer. Lord, strengthen my hands. Let's go look at this. They're not done. Now they're just changing tactics. They can't get Nehemiah to come out and meet with them, so they send a servant, this time with a different letter. And notice what the letter says. It's basically accusing Nehemiah of setting up this wall for the purpose of rebelling. And essentially, what they're doing is saying, we're going to send this letter to Babylon. And when they find this out, they aren't going to be very happy. Notice how much of this story is now developed from just a rebellion to Nehemiah being set up as king. Notice what the letter says. It's reported among the nations. Notice the exaggeration there. It's reported among the nations. And Geshmu says that you and the Jews intend to rebel. So there's all of this rumor, obviously, that's started, and it's permeating, and this letter may not even be totally true. In other words, what I mean by that is, yes, it's an attempt to blackmail Nehemiah, but what I'm saying is that there's no reason to believe that there's really this stirring up among the nations. This is the attempt by Sanballat and the others to make Nehemiah believe that this is being said. And as a result, they are going to send this to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. He says that you and the Jews intend to rebel, and it's for this reason that you're rebuilding the wall. So maybe there are rumors that are spreading. The letter clearly is going to be rumored anyway, because if it goes to Nebuchadnezzar, it's full of lies. What may be a further depth of lie is the fact that there are rumors. Really, it seems to me that this idea of Nehemiah building the walls up to rebel against Sanballat or against Nebuchadnezzar is being conjured up by Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem. We look back in chapter 2 when they first appeared, and their argument was, you're just trying to rebel. Well, now what they're doing is they're spreading lies to the rest of the people. So whether their other nations are believing this or they're just telling Nehemiah that the nations are believing this, what they're trying to do, and it's said very clearly, they're trying to frighten Nehemiah into acting a certain way. And further than that, they're not even saying you're going to rebel. They're saying you've set up prophets to declare that you are the king. Notice he says that you're going to be their king according to these reports. You have already appointed prophets and are proclaiming this. The phrase, a king is in Judah. Well, that would definitely be an attempt to stir up a rebellion. You've now got a leadership in place. You've got the walls built. Certainly, if that gets to Nebuchadnezzar, that can be a problem. Now, I would say one of the things that Nehemiah had going for him earlier was the fact that Nebuchadnezzar supported this. It could be, of course, the way that this letter could work is to turn Nehemiah or Nebuchadnezzar against Nehemiah, thinking that Nehemiah had been lying all along. But that would then seem to trade on the fact that Nehemiah had been his cupbearer all those years and was someone to be trusted. What kind of, how I'll say, what kind of traitor act would that be if it were true that Nehemiah would have Nebuchadnezzar help and then turn around and then rebel against Nebuchadnezzar? That would make Nehemiah the ultimate liar. What we could bank on, of course, is the fact that Nehemiah was a trusted individual. He'd already been endorsed and supplied by Nebuchadnezzar, but you just never know how things are going to work when threats, seeming threats against the nation would arise, especially now if word gets back to Nebuchadnezzar that Nehemiah is setting himself up as king. They say it's going to be reported to the king, king of Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar, according to these reports. With that threat, they say, now let's have a meeting. Let's come together. Let's consult together. Language similar to what God says through Isaiah in Isaiah, come, let us reason together. There, of course, God is calling them back. Here, this is a ruse. They said, let's come back together and meet. Of course, they're blackmailing him. They are threatening him by saying, if you don't meet with us, we're just going to tell King Nebuchadnezzar that you set yourself up as king and you're going to rebel. And that's the only reason you're building these walls. Well, verse 8, Nehemiah responds and says, I sent a message. He says, then I sent them a message saying this, quote, nothing like these things that you are saying has been done, but you are inventing them in your own mind. Notice what Nehemiah does here. He doesn't, again, try to come up with something clever. He sticks to the truth. What he's doing is what Jesus later would say, let your yes be yes and your no be no. He doesn't have to keep coming up with reasons why he doesn't want to meet, and he doesn't have to keep coming up with attempts to avoid this persecution. He just says, you're lying. You're lying. You've invented this yourself. You've drummed up this drama. You're the one who has conjured up this story. I've not done anything like this. You can't substantiate it. What he says in verse 9 for us as readers is he has identified and exposed what the point of all this is. It says all of them were trying to frighten us, thinking, quote, they will become discouraged with the work and it will not be done. Now, here's what's going on with that one extra layer. Not only is the threat against Nehemiah, it seems as if what's going on is this word about the rumor about Nehemiah would spread among the people, be concerned that the potential invasion by Babylon could come and they would give up and then it wouldn't get done. So we can see they are not stopping at any point to keep Nehemiah from completing the wall. This is how evil they are, if I can say it that way. Definitely how determined they are to oppose Nehemiah. They want us to be discouraged so that we would stop the work. Notice this is, quote, an 11th hour attempt. Everything's done except the doors, but they're not stopping until the very end. Notice what Nehemiah does in the very end of verse 9. But now, God, strengthen my hands. We've noted over and over again that Nehemiah would be in prayer about all things that he was dealing with regarding the walls around Jerusalem. He doesn't stop there. He's been wise in this sense. He knows who they are that he's dealing with. He knows their motives. He's known their attempts. He's known what they've been about. And now he can even see that what they're doing with these threats can't be substantiated because they're not true. That doesn't mean other people won't believe it. Doesn't mean that Nebuchadnezzar won't believe it. But what he's doing is he's working in response to them saying, you're making all of this up. You've invented this. This isn't true. He tells us, of course, he knows, and he's trying probably to tell the people that he's working with, look, they're trying to make you discouraged. They don't want the work to get done. So if word is spreading among them that there's a word of rumor about Nehemiah in the end trying to make himself king, and they don't know about it, then they might be convinced of it. And of course, any threat from Babylon would discourage them. That's why Nehemiah would then follow that up with more prayer. It takes more strength to deal with the opposition and the tactics that the opponents are using. They've said, come and meet in another place. Probably they would kill him. Here, they're threatening him by saying, we're going to tell the Babylonians on you, and maybe that'll get you to stop. But he's not fearful of that because he knows the truth. And I think that's a principle we want to come back to at the end. He knows the truth about himself. Well, then we have the climax, if you will, the culmination of this opposition, and it's really deep and dark. Notice this third invitation to meet in chapter 6, verses 10 to 14. When I entered the house of Shemaiah, the son of Delaiah, son of Mehetabel, who was confined at home, he said, let's meet together in the house of God within the temple, and let's close the doors of the temple, for they are coming to kill you, and they are coming to kill you at night. But I said, should a man like me flee? And who is there like me who would go into the temple to save his own life? I will not go in. Then I realized that God certainly had not sent him, but he uttered his prophecy against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. He was hired for this reason, that I would become frightened and act accordingly and sin, so that they might have an evil report in order that they could taunt me. Remember, my God, Tobiah and Sanballat in accordance with these works of theirs, and also Noadiah the prophetess and the rest of the prophets who were trying to frighten me. Well, let's unpack that a little bit. What's happening here? Well, first there was the let's just meet. Then there was, you better meet with us or we're going to tell. And now there is the other lie against Nehemiah or to Nehemiah about the Babylonians. They said, let's meet. So Shemaiah, the son of Delaiah, the son of Mehetabel, these are all priests. These are all related to the priesthood in Jerusalem. This man was confined at home, at least in italics, the NASB says at home. The request, let's meet together in the house of God within the temple and close the doors of the temple, for they are coming to kill you, and they're coming at night. What they're trying to do, of course, is get Nehemiah into the temple, two things, under the guise of protecting him against people who are plotting to kill him. Maybe Babylon, maybe others. The other thing is that along the lines, it's more likely they're going to try and take his life. But there's the statement about what Nehemiah says in reason he won't do it is that there's a potential of him sinning in doing this. We'll come to that in a moment. Notice the extent, though. Now they're going to invoke the house of God as a place of protection. It's almost like this is a refuge, an asylum, a place of asylum. Nehemiah doesn't need asylum. He hasn't done anything wrong. He's not committed a crime where he would need to find this refuge. And he doesn't want to use the house of God as a place of protection either. He's not hiding from anybody. He has no reason to hide from anybody. He doesn't believe their story that there's anyone coming, and he certainly wouldn't believe at this point that Nebuchadnezzar is coming. They have just, again, created another lie. It's kind of interesting. They're accusing him or making accusations. They claim they will threaten to make accusations against him to Babylon, false accusations, of course. What they're doing, though, to bring it about is a lie. They are accusing him of lying. They're going to accuse him to others, accuse him to others about being a liar. But they're using the tactics that they claim he's using or they would lie about him doing. I hope you get what I'm trying to say there. They're doing the things that they are accusing or would accuse Nehemiah of. Using the house of God, a place of worship, a place of sacrifice, a place where they are to grow closer to God, to treat it like a safe house, to treat it like a panic room when there's really no threat at all. The threat is from the people trying to have these meetings. And Nehemiah is not, he's not having it. Verse 11, he says to them in response, should a man like me flee? And who is there like me who would go into the temple to save his own life? I will not go in. He's not going to use the temple for that reason. I have no reason to flee. I've done nothing wrong. He's already established that in the previous section. Here, he knows he doesn't have any, he's not in rebellion against Nebuchadnezzar. He's not afraid. He knows there's no threat. The only threat are the people that are trying to meet with him. He said, I'm not going to go in the temple to save my own life. And that's interesting the way he says it in verse 12, because earlier it's very clear that he had discernment to understand what was going on. He says in verse 12, I realized that God certainly had not sent him. Again, this is a priest. This is someone who would be trusted in many respects, someone who would be leading them in a right relationship with God. Clearly what he says is wrong, but then Nehemiah goes another level and says, wow, God didn't even send him. Rather, he uttered his prophecy against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. He was I'll say it this way, a prophetic hitman. He was told by Tobiah and Sanballat to prophesy wrongly about this threat coming to Nehemiah. And we know, of course, what the Bible has to say about false prophets. There's this idea of blasphemy on the one hand, charading and masquerading as a prophet when not being one. And then, of course, there is the problem of claiming to be prophesying on behalf of God and it be a false prophecy. Here, Nehemiah recognizes this is just another ruse of Tobiah and Sanballat to come after me. It says verse 13, he was hired for this reason, that I would become frightened and act accordingly and sin. Frightened, of course, that there would be anyone coming against him, and then act accordingly. What does that mean? Well, act as someone afraid and go hide. And hide where? A place no less than the temple. What would be his sin? Probably looking like he's hiding from Nebuchadnezzar, looking like he's going to fight Nebuchadnezzar, and possibly even using the temple, as we said, as an asylum, using it for a lie. Then he follows that up with sin in these words, so that they might have an evil report in order that they could taunt me. Maybe something like this. Maybe what they would be doing is going around spreading rumors about how afraid Nehemiah is, how he has shrunk back, how he has become a coward all of a sudden. Here's this leader who has been guiding them and has stood up to them and others and larger armies to keep the wall in process, the building of the wall in process. And now they might taunt him by lying about how Nehemiah is hiding and he's afraid and he's a coward. Why would you follow him? Notice then the final word in verse 14. Nehemiah again prays, remember, my God, Tobiah and Sanballat in accordance with these works of theirs. You know what they've done. Remember them. That could be a word of prayer about judgment for them. And then he said also Nodiah the prophetess. Um, what we have here is a person who's not been named before, but clearly someone hired to join in with these false prophets. And he goes on to say the other rest of the prophets that were trying to frighten me. Each time there's an attempt to meet, the invitation to meet, there's the attempt to frighten Nehemiah and to frighten us, he would say. Clearly, what we're seeing in these opponents is, as we said before, stopping at nothing to keep his enemy or their enemies, in their minds, Nehemiah, from completing the work. It makes you wonder what they're afraid of. What they claim to be the problem is not the problem. Nehemiah is not building these walls so as to rebel against Nebuchadnezzar. You could say no less they just have it out for Nehemiah. Here's someone who is leading, maybe stepping on their toes as leaders of the people, whatever established authority they want to have or system they want to put in place. Nehemiah comes in as a strong leader, representative of God and the Jews in establishing the temple first that was established before him, getting there, and then the walls to protect it. There's a lot that they're afraid of, and they're projecting that fear on Nehemiah by trying to meet with him and knowing Nehemiah does that it's harm. It's nothing but harm. In each case, we see that Nehemiah is praying. We've talked about imprecatory prayers before and whether or not it would be appropriate. Here, he doesn't say what that would mean, other than maybe God would judge Tobiah and Sanballat and the other false prophets for the lies that they have spread, that there would be an accounting for what they've done. What are some principles that we can draw from this? Well, one thing we can be for sure of, if you're going to work for God, there's going to be opposition. As has been said in the lesson before, anything is a kingdom assignment if it's something even like raising your children in a Christian home. It could be serving in the church. It could be living out as a mentor in discipling somebody. Of course, the church in general, individually as a local church and the church universal, is pushing forward to share the gospel with people. There's going to be opposition. Satan's not going to give up just because he knows his demise. Clearly, Sanballat, Tobias, and Shemesh or Geshem and others recognize that every attempt that they've made against Nehemiah has failed. They've thrown accusations against him that they know aren't true, and he's not cowering to them. He's not trying to come up with alternate plans to say, wow, if they going to do that, I need to find another way around. No, he hits them back directly, not literally, of course, with the truth. I'm not going to meet with you. I'm working. I'm also not going to uh, let you lie about me by saying that I'm building the walls to create a rebellion. That's not true. And certainly, I'm not going to lie and hide just to satisfy you because you would just turn that around against me to my people. You're lying. You're the ones that are setting up these schemes. You're the one trying to destroy me. So what we see Nehemiah doing is recognizing there's been opposition and it's not stopping. I don't know what the opposition to your ministry is. And I say that word very generally because if you are going to live out your Christian faith, you're going to live for God. You have a kingdom assignment. It may be on the level of your family. It may be on the level of a classroom. It may be your influence at work. It may be in partnering with other people at church. It might be your leadership of a church. We all are called to do the work of God in our lives, and He's given us all specific assignments. Just know that you are going to be opposed. We need to be ready and face that opposition. Be wise, be discerning, stand on the truth. Nehemiah stood on the truth. He knew when people were lying about him, and he said, that's not true. He didn't have to come up with something else to prove it. He just has to say, you're lying. That's not true. One of the things that Jesus said in Matthew 7 in the Sermon on the Mount was addressing the matter of false prophets, false teachers. I want to read that to you because while it's not tied directly to the text, it obviously has a parallel and it has a correlation and an application for us. So let me find that real quickly and then I'll read that to you and then we can have a concluding time of prayer. Beginning here near the end of the Sermon on the Mount, beginning of Jesus' ministry, forgive my not being set. He says these things. Beware of the false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Grapes are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor figs from thistles, are they? Jesus asked. You know that there aren't grapes from thorn bushes and figs from thistles, right? So every good tree bears good fruit, but the bad trees bear bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. So then you will know them by their fruits. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Leave me, you who practice lawlessness. Of course, Jesus goes on to the next level related to the judgment, the end of each of these false prophets. What Jesus is doing here is making more explicit for what Nehemiah was doing implicitly. He was watching their fruits. Jesus says, you'll know someone's a liar by their fruit. You'll know that they're true by their fruit. What he's saying is, if they're good, if they are true, their actions and their words will be good and true. If not, then they won't. We need to be discerning. We need to be aware that there are false teachers, there are false prophets, there are people who are opposed to us. And what we need to do then is be on our guard. We need to be ready when that opposition comes so that we can give the right answer. The right answer, of course, would be the truth. We need to be able to call out those who are trying to lie about us. I'm not trying to be militant here, but I do think we need to recognize that we can be faithful to the work of God and take joy in that, but we also have to be ready, as we've learned in the book of Nehemiah, that there's going to be opposition. So what we have to do is be aware of, quote, the schemes of man. What we want to do is follow some of the instructions or the examples of Nehemiah, being aware and responding in kind. One of the things that Nehemiah did, of course, is that he stayed true. He didn't allow them to lie about him. He focused in on the truth and he prayed. He sought God's guidance to be remembered. He sought God's guidance that those who come against him be remembered. He sought God's guidance for strength against the opposition. This required persistent prayer. I guess what we can say then is not only do we want to pray regarding any opposition we face, we need to be praying preemptively for the strength to do what God's called us to do, for the direction, for the deliberateness of it, for the diligence of it, to be focused on it, and not be distracted by opposition. The opposition is going to be there, but we need to address it in kind. I think Nehemiah gives us a good word there. I hope that there's a lot that you can take from this passage, that as you lead and as you are serving God in all of your capacity, that you be aware of any opposition and address it. There is always going to be opposition. But as Nehemiah said, I'm not going to be fooled. You're trying to lie about me. And so, as our lesson says, the title is Do Not Be Fooled. Don't let yourself be fooled. Let's have a word of prayer. Father, we thank you for this word and the example of Nehemiah. We just pray right now that you will help us to be focused in on you. You've given us each an assignment, and I pray that you will help us to live it out, give us strength, give us focus. And Father, help us to know when to identify the opposition and how to deal with the opposition. We want to live for you. We need your spirit to guide and direct us. We want to become more and more like Jesus every day. We're glad that we can call you Father. And I pray that as you clarify your call in our lives, you will also help us to know how we can stay true to that call and to be aware of any opposition, whether it be a personal opposition or an opposition against the Christian faith. Either way, when we're working for you, it's an opposition against you. Now we just pray for your strength and your guidance. And we do pray that you will hold up opponents at bay. Ultimately, we know you will hold them responsible. We thank you for your word. Help us to live it day by day. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, as we conclude, I just want to again remind you that what we're doing with this lesson is making ourselves aware of the opposition we may face, and we need to be wise. And I pray that you will be wise and that you will be focused in on God's will for you and all the resources he has for you, and that you will be focused in on obedience to him. May you continually be relentless in your pursuit of obedience to God. Let's have a final blessing as always, and then we'll meet again in our next lesson. And let me give you what that next lesson is going to be before I conclude, and then we'll go forward. Almost forgot. The next lesson, lesson 8, finish the task. We're going to be looking at Nehemiah 15 or 6 verses 15 to 19. A little bit of stumbling there. We're going to see that they actually finished the walls. And it's a few verses. We'll talk about that. We know that the wall was almost finished by the time we have this opposition we faced in this lesson. What we are going to see that after it's all said and done, the task is finished. And so that's an encouragement to us. We need to press forward to finish the task. Until that next lesson, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his face to you and give you peace.